It's funny. When a business or like even just a department or a tight-knit team completely collapses, human nature instantly sends us out looking for a wrecking ball.
Oh, absolutely. We want an obvious villain.
Right. We want an undeniable external force to blame. We look for a sudden market crash or maybe a ruthless new competitor or just some unpredictable supply chain failure that no one could have possibly seen coming.
Because it's deeply comforting to point at the economy and just say, well, what could we do? There was an earthquake.
Exactly.
Psychologists actually call this the fundamental attribution error. Basically, when things go wrong for us, we blame the environment. We look for that wrecking ball because, honestly, the alternative is terrifying.
It really is, because when you actually autopsy most organizational failures and you start peeling back the layers looking for that, external impact trader, suddenly you realize there is no wrecking
Not
ball.
at all.
Yeah, you look at the blueprints and the day-to-day operations and you realize the foundation just quietly decided to rot from the inside out. The failure wasn't a sudden event. It was this slow creep. I mean, the call is literally coming from inside the house.
Which is the absolute definition of internal structural failure. And if you trace that internal rot back to its absolute origin
Right.
point, it almost always starts at the very top.
Yep.
It starts in the mind of the person leading the charge.
Which is exactly what we are tearing into today. So
Yeah.
for you listening, whether you're, I don't know, managing a massive corporate division, running a lean startup, or frankly, just trying to navigate your own career and lead your household through the chaos of a Tuesday morning, we are doing a deep dive into a source text that fundamentally flips how we understand authority.
It really changes the whole paradigm.
It does. It's called Leading Your Tribe. Lead with Purpose, Build with Intention by James Short. And the mission today is to pull out the most actionable psychological tools from this text so you can shortcut your path to being an effective leader.
And I think the most provocative argument Short makes right out of the gate is that leadership is fundamentally misunderstood as a noun.
Right, like a label.
Exactly. People treat it like a title you were handed, or maybe a genetic trait you're simply born with. Like you either have the leadership gene or you just don't. But the text strips all of that away. Leadership is a learned set of behaviors, and beneath those behaviors, it is a highly specific psychological mindset.
It's all internal.
Right. And the core thesis is brutal but necessary. Before you can even begin to think about leading a team or a company, you have to master leading the person in the mirror. Because if you are not actively leading yourself, your anxieties and your unexamined habits are just leading you.
Okay, so let's ground this immediately in reality, because the source material provides this anatomy of a failure that is so spectacular, and it perfectly illustrates what happens when a leader lacks that internal mastery. We really need to talk about Mike.
Oh, Mike. This story is just, wow.
It's wild, right? So Mike owned a luxury tour company, and for the first decade or so, Mike was the picture of the American dream. I mean,
Right.
he started small, he was grinding it out, and he grew the business from a handful of tours a year to over 250 high-end luxury excursions annually.
That's massive growth.
Massive. But Mike had this blind spot that eventually swallowed his entire company. He was violently resistant to technology.
Yeah, he was running a modern, scaling logistics business on an archaic, localized paper system. And we really have to look at the psychology of why he did that.
Because it seems crazy to us now.
It does, but when he was a solopreneur doing 20 tours a year, paper worked perfectly fine. He could hold the entire operational model in his head. But as the business scaled to 250 tours involving thousands of clients, hotels, van rentals, dietary restrictions, I mean, he just refused to adapt.
He didn't just refuse, he actively built a monument to inefficiency. He literally forced his staff to print out every single email.
Which is just mind-boggling.
Right. Every customer detail, every shifting tour logistic, vendor invoices, financial records, it was all kept in physical manila folders inside metal filing cabinets.
It's a textbook case of the illusion of control.
Yeah.
Mike associated physical paper with safety. Like, if he could touch the file, he felt he controlled the business. He had employees whose entire salaries were essentially dedicated to making physical copies, walking to filing cabinets, and archiving duplicates.
He was paying human beings to act as a 1990s hard drive.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, the friction in that office was immense. But instead of stepping back and realizing, wow, our foundational system is flawed, Mike just hovered. He became the ultimate micromanager.
The text actually describes him standing over his employees' shoulders, just watching them file papers.
Yeah, criticizing their speed, pulling them off urgent client calls to do something mundane, and then screaming at them for not finishing the first task. The entire company was trapped in a permanent state of reactionary crisis management.
And notice where Mike is placing the blame here. He viewed this daily operational chaos as a behavioral failure of his staff. I mean, he proudly called himself a self-made man. His constant refrain to his team was, I've always done things this way, and it was never a problem until now.
Which implies that his paper system is completely flawless and his employees have simply become inept.
Right. It's their fault.
Precisely. He completely detached himself from the mathematical reality that the sheer volume of data processing required for 250 tours, combined with a manual paper system, was just structurally impossible to maintain. He blamed the people for the failure of the process.
So predictably, the system breaks. And the climax of this story, the real wrecking ball that finally hits Mike's company, is actually just a single piece of paper.
This part is so painful to read.
It really is. So almost 15 years into the business, he's finally, begrudgingly, having a software system designed, but it's way too late. Someone in the office accidentally misfiled a handwritten sheet of paper. And this wasn't just a memo. This single sheet contained the master booking information for an upcoming high-end luxury tour.
Think about the fragility of that for a second. A multi-million-dollar business resting on a single piece of loose-leaf paper.
Just floating around an office.
Right. And when that paper vanished into the wrong manila folder, they experienced total operational blindness. They had a massive tour approaching, and literally nobody in the office knew how many people had actually paid, what specific excursions they had requested, or even how many hotel rooms needed to be booked.
It's pure logistical panic. I mean, they are flying completely blind. So what do? They have to do the most humiliating thing a luxury business can possibly do. They literally email the customers who have already paid thousands of dollars, apologize, and ask them to reply with a list of what they had paid for.
The erosion of trust there is immediate, and it's catastrophic. Because when you charge a premium, you are selling certainty. You're selling competence. Asking the client to do your bookkeeping completely shatters that illusion.
And the clients reacted exactly as you would expect. 12 of the 19 customers immediately canceled their trips and demanded full refunds.
Unsurprising.
Totally. But here is where Mike's leadership failure goes from just incompetent to actively toxic. What about the remaining 7 customers who actually still wanted to go?
Oh, this is the worst part.
Mike's company lied to them. To avoid admitting the full extent of their operational collapse, they told those remaining clients that the tour was canceled due to low participation. They fabricated a story, blamed a lack of interest, and refunded 100% of the money to everyone.
And we really need to trace the financial fallout of that single misfiled paper because it highlights how operational leverage works in reverse. It wasn't just the lost revenue from the refunds, right?
Right, the refunds alone total over $60,000. But then the dominoes really start falling. The freelance tour guides who had blocked out their schedules, well, they demanded their lost wages. The luxury van rental companies had non-refundable deposits.
The hotels, too.
Yeah, the high-end hotels they used demanded payment for at least 2 nights per guest because the cancellations violated the group booking contracts. So all told, the direct financial hit from this one lost piece of paper was a $100,000 loss.
A staggering failure of process.
And Mike's reaction to this catastrophe, he screamed at his employees. He berated them so intensely that several walked out on the spot. Within a really short period, every single employee quit.
We have to diagnose the pathology here because Mike is the ultimate anti-model. The failure wasn't just bad logistics, and it wasn't just being a late adopter of software.
No, it was much deeper.
Right. The root cause was a profound lack of self-awareness. It was a total absence of empathy and a highly fragile ego that structurally prevented him from taking ownership. When a leader has an ego that fragile, they simply cannot metabolize negative feedback. They have to externalize it.
They have to find a scapegoat.
Exactly. Mike saw problems purely as employee insubordination, never as an opportunity to audit his own leadership or his systems. In fact, his ego was so delicate that to save face with his friends and investors after the mass exodus, he actually lied again. He told everyone he was just retiring and choosing to close the business, rather than admitting it collapsed under his mismanagement.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because reading through that section of the text, it felt like Mike was treating his business like a leaky boat. But instead of fixing the hole, he just stood over his crew yelling at them for not bailing water fast enough.
That was a perfect analogy.
Right. He treated the physics of the leak as a behavioral problem of his staff.
He demanded his team outwork a structurally doomed system, rather than stepping into his role as the architect to redesign the system. He refused to lead himself. His ego ran the show, and it literally sank the company.
So if Mike is the ultimate cautionary tale, like the absolute floor of leadership, the text naturally pivots to examine the ceiling. We have to look at leaders who succeeded in highly pressurized environments. And what's fascinating here is that the author found the truly elite leaders didn't succeed because they were born flawless or because they had perfect systems.
Far from it.
Right. They succeeded because they mastered the internal narrative that Mike completely ignored. They learned to control the story playing in their own heads before they tried to control their companies.
And the source text gives us this gallery of historical and modern figures to illustrate this success mindset.
Yeah, like Sir Richard Branson.
Yes, Branson is a great example. He's built this massive, sprawling virgin empire, but he has severe dyslexia. In a traditional corporate environment, that could have been a crippling narrative. He could have told himself he wasn't smart enough to read spreadsheets or manage contracts.
Which a lot of people do.
Right, but he completely refused to let a neurological difference define his limits. He built his internal narrative around the idea that success should be fundamentally fun, and he just delegated the things he struggled with.
We see this pattern of aggressive narrative control repeatedly throughout history. Look at Winston Churchill. He is widely considered one of the most formidable leaders of the 20th century, steering Britain through World War II. Yet Churchill battled severe, paralyzing bouts of depression. He famously referred to it as his black dog.
Which is such a powerful way to externalize it.
It really is. He didn't say, "I am broken." He said, "There is a dog that follows me." It separates his identity from his condition.
Exactly. It's an act of narrative dominance. Historians and psychologists actually argue that he used the manic energy that often accompanied his depressive cycles to his advantage.
He weaponized it.
He did. He maintained a grueling schedule that exhausted his staff but kept him outworking the crisis. He used what could have been a debilitating weakness as an operational strength.
The text also brings up Katharine Graham. She was the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, taking over the Washington Post. And you want to talk about a hostile environment, she had absolutely no female role models in that sphere.
None.
She faced relentless structural disrespect from her own male staffers, her board members, and competitors simply because of her gender. It would have been so easy for her internal narrative to become, I don't belong here, I should just step down.
But she anchored herself.
Yeah, she changed the story to one of stewardship of the truth and ultimately guided the paper through the Pentagon Papers and the Watergate scandal. She brought down a corrupt presidency.
And perhaps the most extreme example of narrative control in the text is Nelson Mandela.
Oh, absolutely.
Labeled a terrorist by the state, stripped of his freedom, and locked in a tiny cell for 27 years. The raw data of his life was objectively hopeless.
The environment was literally designed to break his spirit.
Yet, he maintained an internal focus on a unified post-apartheid South Africa. He refused to let the concrete walls dictate his internal reality.
Okay, so looking at Branson, Churchill, Graham, and Mandela, these are massive historical figures. But the mechanism they used is available to anyone. They experienced profound, restrictive external realities, right? Neurodivergence, mental illness, systemic sexism, literal imprisonment. But they separated the external facts from their internal story.
And the text makes a fascinating pivot right here. It moves from these grand historical examples down to the literal neuroscience of our daily vocabulary. It talks about the actual physical energy of our words.
This is where it gets crazy to me.
It's where leadership psychology intersects with biology. We often treat self-talk as just, harmless background noise. But the text argues that the story you tell yourself literally dictates your physiological reality. If you walk into your office every morning and say to yourself, "Man, I'm so sick and tired of dealing with these people," your brain doesn't treat that as a metaphor.
Your body actually listens to it.
Precisely. The brain processes that negative language, activates the amygdala, which is the fear and stress center, and triggers a release of cortisol. Your heart rate variability changes, your immune system function can actually dip. You quite literally become physically sick and exhausted. Your words are not just descriptive, they are prescriptive. They create the biological state you operate from.
The authors suggest a real-time experiment to prove this, and I really want you, the listener, to actually try this with us right now. It takes 5 seconds. So wherever you are, just sit quietly for a moment, let your face relax, and say out loud or in your head, nothing good ever happens to me. I'm just stuck. Just repeat that narrative twice.
And if you pay close attention to your body when you say that, you will feel a physical change.
You really do.
Your shoulders likely slump a millimeter, your breathing becomes slightly shallower, the energy just drains out of your chest. Your nervous system is responding to a narrative of hopelessness.
Okay, now let's completely shift gears. We're going to hack the system. Force a massive, almost absurdly goofy smile onto your face. Just paste it on there, show your teeth, crinkle your eyes.
It feels ridiculous, but do it.
Right, because the text points out this psychological phenomenon. It is actually physiologically nearly impossible to hold a genuine, broad smile and feel intense anger or despair at the exact same moment. So hold that big, ridiculous smile and say, everything is coming together for me. Things are working out perfectly.
The shift is instantaneous.
That's wild.
You are utilizing what psychologists call the facial feedback hypothesis. The act of smiling forces the brain to recognize the muscle contraction associated with joy, which then prompts the brain to release a tiny hit of dopamine and serotonin. You focus your reticular activating system on what could go right, and that positive energy transforms your capacity to take action. You suddenly feel a micro burst of motivation.
But wait, let's inject a little reality here. Because when I read that section, my immediate reaction was, well, isn't this just the definition of toxic positivity?
Yeah.
I mean, if my business is hemorrhaging money or my team is falling apart, if the building is literally on fire, standing in the flames with a goofy smile saying everything is coming together perfectly, isn't just unhelpful, it's dangerously delusional.
That is a critical distinction to make, and it's the difference between denial and cognitive reappraisal. The text is not advocating for delusion. Facts are facts. The building is on fire. That is the raw data. You cannot smile away a fire. But the story you attach to the fire is entirely up to you. Toxic positivity is saying, what fire? It's just a little warm. Everything is fine. That gets you killed.
Right, it's denial.
But cognitive reappraisal, which the text advocates, is saying, this is a disaster. The building is burning, but I have the resilience to rebuild, I have the leadership to get my team out safely, and we are going to learn from this. The fire is exactly the same, but the narrative dictates whether you freeze in panic or take decisive action.
The author uses that classic glass half full or half empty trope to explain this, which, usually makes my eyes roll, but there's a real twist to it here.
Right. The standard cliche is that the optimist sees it half full, the pessimist sees it half empty. It's a binary way of looking at attitude.
But the text reframes the physics of the glass entirely. It says the glass is actually technically completely full at all times.
Yep.
Half of it is filled with water, which is a tangible resource you can see and measure. But the other half isn't a void. It is filled with air. And in this analogy, the air represents potential.
It is a brilliant paradigm shift. When you train your mindset to see the air as a tangible asset, you realize you are never operating from a deficit. You focus on what you have right now, the water, and the infinite possibilities of what you can add to it, the air.
I love that.
It strips away the anxiety of scarcity. It is not about ignoring the fact that you only have 4 ounces of water. It's about recognizing that you have 4 ounces of room to grow.
I love the mechanics of that. The air is potential. Okay, so let's say you master this. You avoid becoming Mike. You take control of your narrative. You utilize cognitive reappraisal. You focus on the potential in the room. And inevitably, you start succeeding.
Which is the goal.
Yes, your team hits its targets, your business grows, you get the promotion. But here is the cruel trick of human psychology. The moment you achieve that success, your brain doesn't let you rest. It just builds a new trap. It attacks you from a completely different angle.
Oh, without fail. The saboteurs of the mind evolve as you evolve. And the most insidious saboteur that arrives specifically when you reach the top is imposter syndrome.
We all know the term, but the way the text dissects it is fascinating. Imposter syndrome is essentially the creeping dread that you are going to be exposed as a total fraud. It's this persistent internal fear that despite your degrees, your track record, and the actual empirical evidence of your competence, someone is going to walk into your office with a clipboard, tap you on the shoulder, and say, well, we figured it out. You don't belong here.
And what is so counterintuitive about imposter syndrome, as the text points out, is that it is a natural byproduct of success.
Right.
It is the shadow of achievement. You only feel like an imposter because you've actually managed to elevate yourself into a room where you feel out of your depth.
Exactly. I mean, if you were sitting on your couch playing video games all day, you wouldn't feel like an imposter. You'd just feel comfortable. The very presence of imposter syndrome is proof that you are pushing the boundaries of your capability. But the text contrasts imposter syndrome with another saboteur that I think is far more dangerous, mainly because society actively applauds it: perfectionism.
Perfectionism is the ultimate Trojan horse of the professional world. It is highly destructive, but it is disguised as a positive, elite trait.
Right. Think about every job interview ever. When they ask, "What's your biggest weakness?" half the candidates lean in and humbly brag, "Well, honestly, I'm just too much of a perfectionist. I care too much." They wear it as a badge of honor. But the text argues it is a massive liability.
To understand why, we have to look at the psychological roots the text provides for both of these saboteurs.
Hmm.
Imposter syndrome stems from a cognitive inability to internalize your own agency in your success. You look at your achievements and you attribute them to luck, to timing, or to other people's help. You aggressively discount your own sweat equity.
And the cure for this, according to the source, is grounding yourself in a very blunt, fundamental truth about human existence. Everyone, literally every single titan of industry, starts with absolutely nothing.
It is the great equalizer. We are all born naked, helpless, with zero skills, zero knowledge, and zero competence.
Even if you are born into massive generational wealth and privilege, you still start out not knowing how to tie your shoes, let alone how to read a P&L statement or negotiate a contract. You have to learn the mechanics of execution from scratch. The text says the playing field at birth is leveled by one singular, amazing tool: human imagination.
Yes.
If you have the imagination to see a goal and you put in the grueling hours to acquire the skills to achieve it, you deserve the success. You're not an imposter pulling a fast one on the world. You simply did the work to learn the game.
Which brings us back to why perfectionism is so uniquely toxic compared to imposter syndrome. The text requires us to aggressively separate the idea of a high achiever from a perfectionist because they are driven by entirely different neurochemical engines.
This is such an important distinction.
It is. A high achiever is driven by the pursuit of excellence. They put in massive amounts of work, they obsess over the details, but crucially, when the project is done, they accept the results. They own their efforts, they analyze their failures objectively, and they actually derive dopamine and joy from the process of doing the work.
Whereas a perfectionist is driven entirely by fear. A perfectionist will execute a project to 99% accuracy, and instead of celebrating the achievement, they will violently beat themselves up over the 1% that wasn't flawless. They deprive themselves of any joy or satisfaction because they are constantly measuring their reality against an impossible, synthetic standard.
Exactly. High achievement is a sustainable engine for growth. Perfectionism is a fast track to adrenal burnout and team resentment. Because if you lead with perfectionism, you will inevitably project that impossible standard onto your employees, creating a culture of terror where people hide their mistakes instead of fixing them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To really hammer this home, the text uses an analogy about diamonds, and we need to unpack it because it completely shifts how you view quality. We culturally hold up a beautifully cut diamond as the ultimate universal symbol of perfection. It is clear, it is brilliant, it is flawless.
But that flawlessness is an illusion of the naked eye. If you take that exact same multi-million-dollar perfect diamond and put it under a jeweler's loupe or a high-powered microscope, a completely different reality emerges. You will see hundreds of tiny carbon inclusions, microfractures, and structural imperfections.
Right, because it was forged in the violent, chaotic pressure of the Earth's mantle. The only way to get a structurally perfect diamond without any microscopic flaws is to grow it in a highly controlled, synthetic, sterile laboratory environment. And the text point is profound here. Expecting actual, literal perfection in your chaotic, real-world business or your messy human life is demanding a synthetic reality. You are fighting against the laws of physics and human nature. Flawlessness doesn't exist in the wild.
It is a powerful conceptual reframe. If you demand a synthetic level of perfection from yourself or your tribe, you are establishing a failure condition on day one. You have to let go of the illusion of perfection and fiercely embrace the messy pursuit of excellence.
Okay, so let's track where we are. We've dropped the toxic ego of Mike, we've mastered our internal narrative and seen the heir's potential. We've quieted the imposter syndrome by recognizing our own hard work, and we've shed the suffocating weight of perfectionism.
We're doing great.
We are. But what happens next? We are essentially left standing on the edge of a cliff, staring out at the vast unknown of our goals. And even without perfectionism, standing on that edge is terrifying. We are biologically wired to fear failure. How do we actually take the leap? We have to completely re-engineer our relationship with fear itself.
This is where the text makes one of its most compelling arguments. Our instinct is to think that the opposite of fear is bravery. But the text argues that the ultimate practical antidote to fear is not bravery. It is curiosity.
Curiosity. That completely reframes the emotional landscape. When you are terrified of a new project, you don't have to puff your chest out and pretend to be fearless. You just have to get incredibly interested in it.
From a neurological perspective, this is a brilliant hack. Fear activates the amygdala, triggering a threat response. But curiosity engages the prefrontal cortex and triggers the release of dopamine, which is the reward and seeking chemical. You literally cannot be in a state of high panic fear and deep engaged curiosity at the exact same time. The dopamine overrides the cortisol.
The author gives a legendary historical example of this, Steve Jobs. Jobs was famously demanding, notoriously difficult to work with, but his ultimate secret weapon as a leader wasn't just his design aesthetic, it was that he was insatiably, ruthlessly curious about things completely outside his core discipline.
The calligraphy class.
Exactly, his time in college. He dropped out of his required classes, but he dropped in on a random calligraphy class.
Which at the time had absolutely zero practical application to building circuit boards or operating systems. It was a completely curious tangent. He just found the history of serif and sans serif typefaces beautiful and fascinating.
But a decade later, when they were designing the first Macintosh computer, that single curiosity-driven class was the reason the Mac was the first computer to have beautiful, proportionally spaced typography. Before that, computer text was just ugly, monospaced green blocks. His curiosity fundamentally changed human-computer interaction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a critical philosophy in the text regarding modern leadership. We live in an era of hyper-specialization, but the text argues that a true leader must operate as a generalist.
They have to see the whole board.
Exactly. If you are too specialized, you get tunnel vision. You get trapped in the status quo of your specific silo. Relentless curiosity allows a leader to step back, survey the entire landscape, and connect completely disparate dots across different fields. That synthesis is where true innovation lives. You hire specialists to execute the granular details, but the leader must remain the chief curiosity officer, maintaining the big picture.
And to help us maintain that curiosity when things inevitably go wrong, because they will, the author introduces an acronym to restructure how we view the scary stuff. It takes the word FAILURE and turns it from a definitive dead end into a diagnostic roadmap. It stands for Forge, Accept, Investigate, Look, Understand, Reevaluate, and Expect.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that acronym because it functions as an emotional circuit breaker. Forge a new way forward. This means immediately shifting your brain from wishing for a time machine to looking at the current reality.
Right.
Except that failures are not anomalies, they are the required tuition for learning. Investigate the specific granular choices that led to the outcome, treating it like a forensic audit rather than a guilt trip.
Then look for alternatives in your environment that you might have missed. Understand the critical difference between failing at a task and being a failure as a human being. Reevaluate the systems and habits that led to the breakdown. And finally, expect to ultimately succeed by revisualizing the end goal.
Yeah.
But I have to be honest, I wrestled with this a bit. Because the acronym is incredibly clinical. It almost makes failure sound like a sterile robotic process. But failure hurts. It's embarrassing. It costs money. If we use this acronym to completely remove the emotion from failure, aren't we ignoring vital data? Doesn't fear and disappointment tell us what we actually value?
That is a very astute pushback, and it's important to clarify the text's intent here. The goal of the FAILURE framework is not emotional suppression, it is emotional regulation. You are absolutely right that the sting of failure is vital data. It tells you that you care. But if you let the emotion dictate the aftermath, you end up like Mike, screaming at your employees and lying to your investors. The acronym allows you to feel the sting, but then forces your cognitive brain back online to extract the lesson. It builds mental toughness through a concept the text refers to as the principle of progressive resistance.
Progressive resistance, like lifting weights.
Exactly. In kinesiology, your muscles do not grow when they're at rest. They only experience hypertrophy, which is growth, when you stress them with physical loads heavier than they are accustomed to. The micro tears from the stress force the body to rebuild the muscle stronger.
And if you stop lifting, they shrink.
Yes, if you remove the heavy loads, the muscle inevitably atrophies. The text argues that business acumen, emotional intelligence, and leadership capability work on the exact same biological principle. You only grow your capacity to lead through the friction and stress of adversity. Nobody's finest hour, no massive breakthrough in innovation ever occurred when everyone was perfectly comfortable and the waters were completely calm.
You need the pressure to forge the diamond. But knowing that logically, knowing that failure is just progressive resistance, well, it doesn't make taking that scary leap any easier when you are staring down the barrel of a terrifying decision on a Tuesday morning. The theory is great, but we need a tactical trigger. And that is why the text offers one of my absolute favorite practical tools in the entire book.
The 30-second courage rule.
Yes, it is a brilliantly simple, actionable takeaway. If you are listening to this right now and feeling overwhelmed by a project, this is for you. The rule is incredibly straightforward. Commit to doing something intimidating, something that makes your stomach drop, that takes exactly 30 seconds or less to execute, and do it every single day.
The genius of this rule lies in how it bypasses the brain's defense mechanisms. When you contemplate a massive, scary project, your amygdala floods your system with anxiety, causing paralysis by analysis. But 30 seconds. That is a temporal threshold so infinitesimally small that your brain can't mount a sufficient defense against it. Everyone can endure 30 seconds of discomfort.
Exactly. It's about breaking the seal of paralysis.
Right.
You don't have to resolve the entire conflict. You just have to dial that dreaded phone number to the client who is furious with you. The ringing takes 10 seconds. You don't have to write a perfect proposal. You just have to hit send on that difficult email you've had, sitting, fermenting in your drafts folder for 3 days. Or, if the paralysis is purely physical and you feel completely sluggish, drop down and do 30 seconds of maximum effort push-ups. You can survive almost anything for half a minute.
And what happens neurologically is profound. With daily repetition of these 30-second bursts, you begin to acclimate to the physiological sensation of risk. You desensitize the fear response. You learn that the action must precede the feeling of courage. You don't wait to feel brave to make the call. You make the call. And the survival of that 30 seconds generates the feeling of bravery.
So I'm going to explicitly challenge you, the listener, right now. Pause and scan your life. We all have that one specific task, that one awkward conversation, or that one email we are actively avoiding today. What is it? Identify it. What can you do right now, the second this deep dive is over, in just 30 seconds, to break your paralysis and move the needle?
It's the ultimate momentum generator. However, we have to acknowledge a structural reality here. Courage in 30-second adrenaline-fueled bursts is a fantastic spark to start the engine, but you cannot run a long-term business or build a sustainable career on daily adrenaline spikes.
You burn out.
That path leads straight to central nervous system exhaustion. To sustain long-term excellence, that raw courage has to be systematized. It must be forged into unbreakable, unconscious habits. Which brings us out of the realm of mindset and into the hard architecture of action.
Habits. The invisible scaffolding of our entire lives. The text anchors this section with a famous quote attributed to Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. It's not about the one heroic thing you do on a Tuesday. It's about the mundane things you do every single day.
Exactly.
And from a neurological standpoint, the text notes that it takes roughly 30 to 90 days of consistent, deliberate repetition to carve a new neural pathway in the brain, to take a behavior from conscious effort to unconscious routine.
This is the process of myelination. When you repeat an action, your brain coats that specific neural pathway with a fatty substance called myelin, which acts like insulation on an electrical wire, making the signal travel faster and more efficiently until the action requires almost zero cognitive load. But the text introduces a crucial friction point here. You rarely have the luxury of building a new habit in an empty space. Our daily routines are already completely full.
Right? Nature abhors a vacuum. If you want to install a new productive habit, you can't just forcefully cram it into your day. You have to evict a bad habit to make room for it. The text calls this the habit exchange. It is a zero-sum game with your daily bandwidth. If you want to build the habit of reading industry literature, you have to actively trade 30 minutes of mindless doom scrolling on social media for 30 minutes of reading a book.
It's a direct swap.
Yep. If you want to build a culture of resilience, you have to swap out the habit of complaining about a supply chain issue for the habit of writing down 3 potential workarounds.
You are trading cheap, immediate dopamine for long-term, sustained serotonin and achievement. But what is truly insightful in this section of the text is how the author identifies our sneakiest, most destructive bad habits. When we think of bad habits, we usually picture obvious, universally recognized vices, right? Smoking, binge eating junk food, or spending 5 hours on TikTok.
Yeah.
But in a professional white-collar context, one of the most destructive bad habits is vastly more subtle. It is procrastination. And the danger is that it rarely looks like laziness. It often masquerades as highly engaged productivity.
Overplanning has hit me right between the eyes.
Exactly. Overplanning is the sneakiest, most insidious form of procrastination in the modern workplace. It looks exactly like work. It feels exhausting like work. You are making spreadsheets, color-coding Gantt charts, scheduling pre-meetings to prepare for the actual meetings. But it produces absolutely zero real-world, tangible results.
You are just spinning your wheels in the mud, generating smoke but no forward momentum. And why do we do it? Because we are too intimidated by the sheer size of the actual execution phase. So we hide in the planning phase where it's safe and predictable.
It is a sophisticated emotional regulation strategy to avoid the vulnerability of actually launching a product or making a decision. So, how do we shatter that habit? The author provides two phenomenal operational frameworks to force execution: eating the frog and the 15-minute miracle. Let's begin with the frog, which is a concept popularized by Brian Tracy, drawing on a quote often attributed to Mark Twain.
The premise is brilliantly visceral. The idea is, if you know that you absolutely must eat a live wiggling frog today, the optimal time to do it is first thing in the morning, the moment you wake up. Why? Because if you leave that live frog sitting on a plate on your desk all day, it is going to radiate anxiety. You will stare at it while you answer emails, you'll think about it while you eat lunch, and it will essentially ruin every other part of your day with impending dread.
It is the perfect metaphor for task prioritization and decision fatigue. In any given day, your frog is that one massive, ugly, intimidating task on your to-do list that you are actively dreading. It's the task you keep magically migrating to tomorrow's list. It might be firing an underperforming vendor, writing a complex legal brief, or auditing a messy budget.
And the text argues that if you force yourself to eat the frog first, before you check your email, before you attend a low-stakes meeting, before you let the day's chaos dictate your schedule, the psychological relief is monumental.
And there's a deep biology supporting this. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for willpower, complex problem-solving, and emotional regulation, is most rested and highly functioning in the first few hours after you wake up. As the day progresses, every tiny decision you make depletes that cognitive fuel. By 3:00 p.m., your willpower is essentially exhausted. If you save the frog for 3:00 p.m., you will almost certainly punt it to the next day. But if you conquer the hardest, ugliest task at 8 a.m., you secure a massive win early, and everything else you do that day feels entirely frictionless by comparison.
Okay, so you eat the frog first. But let's introduce a very real logistical problem. What if the frog isn't just a difficult phone call? What if the frog is a massive, multi-month, seemingly insurmountable project? Say you need to write a 300-page book or migrate your entire company to a new CRM software. You literally cannot eat that frog in one morning. The sheer scale of it causes paralysis. That is exactly where the author deploys the second framework, the 15-minute miracle.
The 15-minute miracle is designed specifically to dismantle the paralysis of scale. The text asserts that dedicating just 15 uninterrupted minutes a day to a massive, intimidating goal will achieve compounding miracles over time.
But let's really interrogate this. Why 15 minutes? When I first read that, it sounded like an infomercial promise. Why not commit to a solid hour or 2 hours? If the goal is massive, 15 minutes seems almost insultingly small.
It is small by design. The genius of the 15-minute parameter is that it establishes a psychological hurdle so low, so utterly achievable, that your brain cannot possibly construct a rational excuse to avoid it. If you commit to working on a terrifying project for 2 hours, your brain will easily convince you that you don't have the energy, or you don't have a clear 2-hour block on your calendar, so you shouldn't even start. But everyone, no matter how chaotic their schedule, no matter how exhausted they are, has 15 minutes. It forces what the author calls the habit of starting.
Because the friction of starting is always the highest point of resistance.
Exactly. In physics, static friction is always greater than kinetic friction. It takes vastly more energy to push a boulder from a dead stop than it does to keep it rolling. The 15-minute miracle simply focuses all your energy on overcoming static friction. And what inevitably happens is momentum takes over. You tell yourself, I'm only going to open the software migration file and map data for 15 minutes. But once you are in the file, the anxiety dissipates, the curiosity engages, and suddenly you look up and an hour has gone by. You've tricked your brain into deep work.
But here is the kicker. The text says that even if you strictly stop after exactly 15 minutes, The mathematics of consistency are undeniable. The math is actually wild when you zoom out. If you dedicate just 15 minutes a day to a singular goal 5 days a week, and let's say you take a few weeks off for holidays or sickness, over the course of a single year, that seemingly insignificant daily micro-habit adds up to over 62 hours of hyper-focused, uninterrupted action. If you do it 7 days a week, it is over 87 hours.
Imagine what you could fundamentally transform in your life or your business with 87 solid hours of pure ruthless focus directed at one specific bottleneck. It completely removes the overwhelm. You are no longer trying to build a new corporate division today. You are simply giving 15 minutes of pure focus today. It is the concept of compound interest applied to human effort.
Okay, so let's consolidate the armory we've built for the listener so far. You have the mental tools. You've rewritten your internal story to see potential. You are embracing failure as data. You are desensitizing fear with 30-second bursts of courage. You're eating the ugliest frog every morning, and you are leveraging the compounding power of the 15-minute miracle. You are a highly functional engine of execution. But an engine needs a steering wheel. Where do you aim all this newfound power? If you aim it in 50 different directions, you just tear yourself apart. This brings us to the final, critical piece of the puzzle. Ultimate strategic execution.
Strategy is where the internal mindset violently collides with the external market. And the primary warning that text issues regarding strategy is the danger of dilution. The old proverb applies. If you chase 2 rabbits, both will escape. If a leader tries to execute 10 different strategic initiatives simultaneously, the team's bandwidth shatters and they end up catching nothing. The text demands that leaders must define their one thing.
The single overriding priority.
Yes. The one thing is the specific goal that, if achieved, makes everything else on the company's to-do list either easier or entirely irrelevant. And crucially, it must be a goal that inextricably aligns with the core values of the tribe.
But here's the massive real-world caveat. The world is deeply chaotic. How on earth do you rigidly commit to a single one thing when a global pandemic can hit tomorrow, or a new AI breakthrough completely commoditizes your core product overnight? If you are too rigid with your one thing, don't you just become a dinosaur?
This raises an important question, right? It's the paradox of planning, and the text highlights a phenomenal, highly specific case study to resolve it. It looks at a restaurant owner in Denver, Colorado, during the brutal onset of the COVID-19 lockdowns in early 2020. This individual owned 5 distinct, successful restaurant concepts. Overnight, by government mandate, all 5 dining rooms were forced to shut down indefinitely.
The raw data of his reality was apocalyptic. His revenue went to absolute zero in 24 hours. He had every excuse in the world to just fold, lay everyone off, and blame the external wrecking ball.
But because he had mastered his internal narrative and understood the true nature of strategy, he instantly pivoted. He didn't cling to the old plan, he clung to his core values. He realized his one thing wasn't actually running 5 dining rooms. His one thing was feeding his community and protecting his core team.
The logistics of his pivot are incredible. He took the perishable food inventory from all 5 locations and consolidated it into his single largest, most efficient kitchen. He then completely repurposed his staff. He started making and donating thousands of free lunches to food-insecure children in the Denver area who were suddenly out of school and missing their only guaranteed meal of the day.
Which is an incredible act of community service, but he is still running a business that needs cash flow.
Exactly. So while the kitchen was pumping out free lunches during the day, he tasked his head chefs with creating a highly streamlined, limited takeout menu featuring the absolute best, highest margin dishes from all 5 of his previous concepts. He also created take-and-bake meal kits for families trapped in quarantine who were exhausted from cooking.
The strategic brilliance here is multifaceted. He built immense, unshakable goodwill within his community by feeding the kids, which is an invaluable long-term asset. But practically, that single, highly efficient takeout kitchen became a massive revenue engine.
It worked beautifully. The community rallied around him. He was able to pay his staff from the profits of the premium takeout and the meal kits. He survived the darkest days of the lockdown without going into massive debt. And as the restrictions slowly lifted, that single, highly profitable ghost kitchen location generated enough excess cash flow to allow him to strategically, one by one, reopen the other 4 physical locations.
This raises another vital question about the nature of strategy. What is the actual lesson here about business planning? The Denver story proves that effective strategic planning is not about predicting the future with crystal ball accuracy. The future is fundamentally unpredictable. True strategy is about building robust systems, cultivating unwavering core values, and training a resilient team so that when the unexpected inevitably happens, you have the agility to pivot your one thing instantly. He demonstrated what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility. He didn't just survive the chaos, he used the chaos to build a more efficient, centralized operational model.
But to execute a highly agile, high-stakes pivot like that, your communication as a leader has to be absolute perfection. There's no room for ambiguity when the ship is taking on water. And this is where the text issues its final, massive warning against what it categorizes as fuzzy language.
Fuzzy language is the bane of corporate execution. It is the use of abstract, jargon-heavy terminology that sounds highly intelligent in a boardroom but provides absolutely zero behavioral direction.
Oh, we have all suffered through these meetings. A VP stands up at the whiteboard and says something like, in Q3, we need to synergize our cross-platform paradigms to harvest operational efficiencies.
Yeah.
And everyone nods solemnly, writes it down in their notebooks, and feels very productive.
It is the linguistic equivalent of overplanning. It is corporate fluff. It gives the illusion of high-level strategic alignment without requiring anyone to commit to a specific measurable action.
Exactly, because if you tell a team of actual human beings to harvest efficiencies, literally no one knows what physical actions to take when they walk back to their cubicles. They just stare at their monitors. But the text points out that even goals that seem relatively concrete can still be fatally fuzzy. For example, if a sales manager writes on the whiteboard, goal, get 20 new clients this week. That sounds like a solid metric.
But the text argues that get 20 new clients is a wish, not a plan. It is the lagging indicator. There is no actionable verb in that sentence that tells the employee how to influence that outcome. You cannot simply force a client to sign a contract through sheer willpower.
Right, you only control the inputs, not the outcomes.
Precisely. A true, actionable, strategic step must be ruthlessly broken down to the behavioral level, the lowest common denominator of action. Instead of the fuzzy goal, get 20 clients, the strategic directive must be translated into. Write 5 specific autoresponder emails highlighting our new product benefits, and send 1 per day to our warm-lead mailing list of 500 prospects at 9:00 a.m.
Now, that is an action a human being can execute. You can categorically check that off a list. You either sent the email at 9:00 a.m. or you didn't. There's nowhere for laziness or confusion to hide.
It creates total accountability. It removes the cognitive load from the employee, allowing them to focus entirely on execution rather than interpretation.
So what does this all mean? We have covered a massive amount of psychological and operational ground today. How do we synthesize all of this? What does this all ultimately mean for you as a leader, whether you are running a Fortune 500 division or just trying to organize a community project? It means that leadership and strategy are not about standing in a boardroom using big fuzzy buzzwords to sound formidable. It is about radically, almost painfully, simplifying your focus down to the daily, granular actions. It's about having the 30 seconds of courage to actually ask a client for the sale, which the text notes people are shockingly terrified to do because they fear rejection. And above all, it is about shifting your entire paradigm from ego to service. It's about constantly looking at your team and your customer and asking one simple defining question: how can I help you get what you want?
Because the ultimate paradox of leadership is that if you focus entirely on providing immense value and helping your tribe get what they want, you will inevitably build the leverage and loyalty to get exactly what you want. It is the definitive shift from the toxic, ego-driven micromanagement of Mike standing over his paper files to the resilient, service-driven, highly adaptable leadership of the Denver restaurant owner.
Let's do a final wrap-up of this journey, because the transformation arc here is incredible. We started by autopsying the collapse of Mike's luxury tour company, a leader who blamed everyone else for his sinking ship because his ego structurally prevented him from adapting his systems. We learned that to avoid that fate, you have to ruthlessly audit and rewrite your internal story. You must utilize cognitive reappraisal to realize that the glass isn't just half full of water, the empty space is actually filled with the potential of air.
We systematically dismantled the saboteurs of the mind. We learned to quiet imposter syndrome by reminding ourselves that every expert started completely naked and clueless, and that imagination levels the playing field. We agreed to abandon the destructive, synthetic weight of perfectionism in favor of the sustainable joy of high achievement.
We re-engineered our biological response to fear by viewing the unknown through the lens of relentless curiosity rather than rigid bravery. We learned to extract the emotion from our mistakes using the diagnostic FAILURE acronym, utilizing progressive resistance to build mental muscle. We established the 30-second courage rule as a daily neurological hack to bypass the amygdala and build the muscle of bold action.
And we operationalized all of that psychology into hard architectural habits. We acknowledged the danger of the habit exchange, identified overplanning as the sneakiest form of procrastination, and committed to conquering decision fatigue by eating the ugliest frog first thing every morning. We learned to lower the activation energy of massive goals by leveraging the compounding mathematical power of the 15-minute miracle.
And finally, we aimed all of that execution power at our one thing: learning to pivot when the world burns down and stripping away all the fuzzy corporate fluff to focus on clear, behavioral, actionable steps that genuinely serve our people. That, fundamentally, from the inside out, is how you lead your tribe.
As we close this out, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, highly provocative thought to wrestle with today. We spent a significant amount of time unpacking the 15-minute miracle and the concept of eating the frog. I want you to look incredibly closely at your professional life, your business, or even your personal relationships right now. Look past the busy work. What is the one frog, that single, highly intimidating conversation, that delayed structural decision, or that scary leap into a new market that you are currently actively disguising as essential planning just to avoid dealing with the vulnerability of execution?
That is the ultimate mirror to hold up.
It is. Once you identify that specific frog, ask yourself, what would actually tangibly happen in your life if you stopped planning and gave that specific task just 15 minutes of unapologetic, bold forward action today?
What an incredible question to end on. Find that frog. Eat it. And remember, the core thesis of everything we've discussed today, the call is always coming from inside the house. If there is a structural failure in your team or your life, it starts with the person in the mirror. But the beautiful flip side to that is, if there is a towering, enduring, massive success in your future, that absolute power starts with you too. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take these psychological tools, rewrite your narrative, and go lead with actual purpose.